University of Tampa, are you ready? U.S. Naval Academy, are you ready? All right. Welcome one and all to the final round. Oh, yeah, the judges are important, aren't they? Fair enough. Judges are also ready. Welcome, everyone, to the Southeast Regional Ethics Bowl final round. Today we have the two top teams, the U.S. Naval Academy and the University of Tampa. Congratulations on making it this far. All right, so a few things to mention before we get ready to begin. No external notes or any materials are allowed with you at this point. This is an ethics competition, and there is an expectation that everyone will treat another with respect. The Ethics Bowl is about ethics, and there is the expectation of civility and respect. If any team or team member violates this expectation, the judges should deduct points, and the behaviors will be reported to the officials. Remember, coaches are not permitted to signal their team in any possible manner, whispering, using sign language, or any other means of communication during the round. Which brings us to a new point for this round, is that this round is being video recorded. So, ladies and gentlemen, game face is on. So, you have microphones in front of you. You will need to be able to pass them between each other so we can pick you up, and it can be saved for posterity on the internet forever and ever and ever. All right, so my name is Christian Moriarty. I am a professor here at St. Petersburg College, and I will be your moderator. Team members will begin to introduce ourselves. We'll start with the University of Tampa.
My name is Connor Clardy. I'm a poli-sci major at the university.
Hello, my name is Ulysses Huili. I am a mathematics and economics dual major, and I am also a sophomore at the University of Tampa.
Hello, my name is Nicole Pacheco, and I am a senior graduating in December from the University of Tampa. My major is political science, and I'm minoring in philosophy.
Hi, my name is Sarah Parker. I'm a senior and a biology major with a minor in environmental science.
All right, I'm sorry, the U.S. Naval Academy, will you please introduce yourselves?
Good evening, everybody. My name's Cole Payton. I'm a sophomore at the Naval Academy, and I major in English.
My name is Marshall Yocklin. I'm also a sophomore at the Naval Academy, and I'm double majoring in history and Arabic.
My name is Elizabeth Shields. I am a senior at the Naval Academy, and I major in chemistry.
My name is David Larkin. I'm a sophomore, and I'm majoring in political science.
My name is Matthew Donovan. I'm a senior at the Naval Academy and majoring in economics.
And coaches, while we do not have microphones for you, would you mind waving to designate that you're here? So, thank you very much. For those watching this video, they're here, I promise. So, judges, would you now like to introduce yourselves?
Kevin Schachter, high school business teacher, Palm Harbor University High School.
My name is Megan Auclair. I've done Ethics Bowl as a participant and a judge for 9 years, and I'm a medical device rep.
My name is Nick Wright. I'm a senior judge at Ethics Bowl for several years now. I'm also an instructor at Pinellas County Schools.
All right, so before we begin, please keep these things in mind. No substitutions are allowed for team members from this point on. If it becomes necessary for a team member to leave the competition for any reason, they may not return until the case being discussed when they have left has been completed. While one team is conferring, the other team and judges may make notes, but may not discuss the case, and as we've seen from the previous rounds that you might have been in, I enforce that. If any situation arises that can affect the match, the moderator will stop the timer and send a room monitor to the head official, but I believe the head official is standing right there, so that probably won't be a problem. Teams may use their own timers. Teams, do you have your own timers? Are you using your own timers? No. All right, so we don't have to worry about that one. Okay, so at this time, I'm going to ask one of the teams to call. Which team would like to call it? Whoever says it first. U.S. Naval Academy called it first. It will be going towards heads. First, I want to designate that is it indeed a fair coin. So would you please see if that is indeed fair?
Yes.
All right. Is it indeed fair? Yeah, judges as well. Fair coin. All right. You said you wanted heads? All right. Let's see. It is tails. University of Tampa, you get to pick whether you want to go first or second.
The University of Tampa elects to go second.
University of Tampa elects to go second. So we will put that on the board. U.S. Naval Academy, you will be going first. All right, judges, on your score sheets in front of you, please put U.S. Naval Academy on your team 1 on the left and the University of Tampa as team 2 on the right. All right, so after I distribute one copy of the case and the questions to both teams, please leave them face down until instructed to turn them over. Now would be a great time for the Jeopardy music. All right, teams, you may turn over the case and the questions on your tables. This question is Case 8, Cholera in Haiti. Should those deployed on peacekeeping and aid missions, like the one in Haiti, be responsible for the unintended consequences of their mission? U.S. Naval Academy, you will have 2 minutes to confer for your case in chief, starting now. Time for conferral is completed. You will have 10 minutes to present your case in chief. At the end of 10 minutes, you are to stop, and I will stop you. You will have a verbal warning for 3 minutes and for 1 minute. Are you ready?
Yes, sir.
All right, 10 minutes, starting now.
So then first we'd like to actually thank the University of Tampa, the judges. This is a great opportunity to have a great discussion. And we'd like to open up our presentation of the case by answering the question. The question being, should those deployed on peacekeeping and aid missions like the one in Haiti be responsible for the unintended consequences of their mission? And I'd like to say that the persons deployed are not solely responsible, but the leadership of the overarching organization is responsible. And we'd like to approach that holistically by looking at a framework that looks at the intent, the action, and the result. And then further, some consequences or some counter-arguments to all of these things. And that's our holistic approach to look at this case and respond to it accurately and ethically. So first, look at the intent. The intent is a greater good for society as a whole. We're talking about addressing or giving humanitarian aid to a nation state that drastically needs it. And so I traveled to Haiti in 2010 post the earthquake to assist in the humanitarian efforts of reconstructing and renovating orphanage homes, 2 orphanage homes as well as a widow's home up in the jungle-like regions. We're looking at Haiti. Haiti is a geographically difficult place to apply aid. It's extremely mountainous. The regions are sloping. It's very hard to do anything in the region. However, also and even to add to that, the infrastructure that was there prior to the earthquake was dismantled. The economic situation is one of the worst in the world. However, and even to add to that, after the earthquake, after a large natural disaster, they were in need of some really big help from the world, and the world responded through humanitarian aid, and it was a great good done for this society. However, that good stops, and the intent of that good stops once regulations and standards weren't met. Regulations and standards set up by the UN in order that the awful consequences of disease being spread in the region, that's first and foremost where the good stops. And then I'd like to actually look at the action of the action on intent of those who were deployed. The action, okay. So it begins with a failure of ownership, overhead, and then a failure of leadership. And applying that model and looking at something like that, a CO, or a commanding officer on board ship, is responsible for everything that happens on ship. He's responsible for, as far as from the sanitation of the lowest deck being cleaned to the highest, the aircraft getting off ship. He's responsible for all of these things. Everything that happens is his responsibility because he's the commanding officer. Similarly, the UN is responsible because they are the overarching figurehead. They are the flagship. They are the leadership in play. Those who were deployed, the Nepalese, these people it's the UN's responsibility to ensure that they adhere to the strict regulations and strict standards that were set in order to prevent disease from being spread. One of my colleagues is going to add on for.
If we look to any executive, regardless of how good of a job they did, if something goes wrong on their watch, the executive is held accountable because it's his responsibility to ensure that the people under him do the right thing. So over the summer, I was on board a ship. It's the USS Porter. It's a destroyer. And a few years ago, the captain of the ship, his name was Commander Areola, and yes, that actually is his name. That's not a joke. Ran the ship into like one of the largest oil tankers in the world. And how he did this is he misinterpreted a situation. There were 2 tankers in a row. He passed one of them fine, made an improper course correction, and ran straight into the next one. The next one was 1.5 miles down before it even stopped. It went through without a problem, but the ship took several years to be rebuilt. The problem, however, is that it is his responsibility on the ship. And so similarly, the same principle applies, is that responsibility moves up the chain of command, whether it be in an executive corporation, whether it be on a ship in the Navy, whether it be the United Nations. So the guiding principle that we have to look at, and it has to be from the command climate, from the United Nations, all the way down to the lowest person on the ground, is the principle that you can derive even from the Hippocratic Oath of first do no harm. If you're going to go and intervene in a humanitarian situation, you absolutely must make sure that you have the ability to do more good than the potential harm. And if you don't, you have no business going on the humanitarian mission. And that's the case of the people in Nepal. And it's a command failure from the United Nations to not ensure that the people from Nepal followed the appropriate sanitation regulations in order to make sure that good was done instead of harm, where you have 600,000 people getting sick. Now I'd like to pass the mic off to my colleague, and he's going to talk about some counter-arguments and other issues.
So to bring it back to the question, we just want to make sure that we're saying that those deployed obviously were the cause of the cholera outbreak, but we're not saying that they were necessarily responsible, because there should have been a higher oversight from the UN to prevent cases like this, which obviously are probable, and here's why.
So one of the main counter-arguments is that the UN had regulations and the Nepalese didn't follow them. And while we understand some of the fault there on the Nepalese part, in the framework of what we have here in the when we look at the correlation to both military and business models, it's important to recognize that the UN did not do everything it could do to keep this from happening. There was not enough oversight, there was not enough regulation, there was not enough not just oversight of what was happening in Haiti, but who actually goes to Haiti. And what, there was diseases that they obviously brought with them that they should have been screened for beforehand to make sure that they didn't have it. And so it's important to recognize that the UN did learn from their mistake, and they are implementing new strategies and regulations and even oversight over areas as outlined in some of the articles that were provided with the case.
My colleagues, they hit on some really strong points that add to the framework of the argument. They hit on that. We've hit on the intent of the action. We've hit on the intent of what's going on, as well as the action itself. And to hit on the last point of the framework being the results that have occurred: 600,000 people infected, 8,000 people dead, plus 8,000 plus people dead. When I went to Haiti, there were strict measures of medical screenings. There were strict measures of where we could put our waste, and all of these are put in place, but in order to protect and keep safe the people that are both parties, the people that are going and the people that are actually already there. The Nepalese didn't do this, and the UN is overall responsible for the actualization and the adherence to strict regulations that are set up for the protection of both of these parties, and they did not do that.
3 minutes.
Also, we want to make it clear that also by what we're proposing, by putting the blame and the pressure on the United Nations instead of the Nepalese, instead of having a situation where you would deter small nations that don't always have the means to give foreign aid but are willing to give it, by putting the pressure on the United Nations, you make the United Nations challenge themselves to make sure that when they're giving foreign aid to nations that need it, they're also going to be sure that what they're giving is true foreign aid. And though they may have helped in the beginning, we can all admit that the Nepalese ultimately did more harm.
Some possible counters include, okay, let's make sure the UN has this oversight and holds their representatives accountable when they do try and give aid. This could be countered by, that's completely impractical. What if there's a huge number of countries that want to be representative of the UN when they go aid this, and we can't necessarily hold every single one accountable? Well, then let's say the UN should be able to recognize the countries that may or may not have the same sanitation standards as others, or the Nepalese may not understand that they can't necessarily put their waste here, even though that's what they do in their own country. They can't do it here because of some sort of infrastructure that's different from what they're used to. But so a good counter to that counter is saying, hey, let's recognize the countries that may or may not have the resources to recognize the risks they present to the countries they're trying to give aid to, and let's bring them the measures of vaccination or disease identification before we send them. And we need to recognize who's vulnerable to that.
One of the greater points that comes about here, as far as holding the UN accountable, is that lawsuits can come out of this. However, in just the placing of lawsuits, the UN can't receive lawsuits because of their immunities. However, we're putting them accountable for their actions, putting them accountable for their failures of leadership, their failure of ownership, and that's what we're doing here as far as how we've approached the question and how we've attempted to put
1 minute.
How we've attempted to answer the question that should those deployed on peacekeeping and aid missions like the one in Haiti be responsible for the unintended consequence of their mission? And we are saying those deployed, no. However, the leadership, the overhead is most definitely responsible. Most definitely. In the Navy, in business models, the leadership loses their job, they're fired when they don't enact the policies and the regulations that are expected for them to adhere. And in this case, we've looked at the intent as good. However, the action failing once they fail to adhere to the regulation, and the result being a great loss for the people of Haiti, and even further, a great loss for the international community that is attempting to adhere to or attempting to do a good thing and apply aid in the nations that need it most. Thank you.
Would you like to see the rest of your time? All right. Judges, please score Team 1, the U.S. Naval Academy, on the top left of your score sheet. At this time, teams, please remain quiet. Judges, are you ready? Okay. University of Tampa, you will have 1 minute to confer with yourselves for your response to the U.S. Naval Academy's case in chief. You'll have 1 minute, starting now.
The University of Tampa is prepared.
I'm sorry, just one moment. Want to make sure that we get everything down correctly.
Oh, I was just telling you that we were prepared.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize for interrupting you then. So, you will have 5 minutes to confer or to commentate starting now.
We'd first like to begin by extending our gratitude to the judges and the moderator for presiding over this evening's debate, as well as the Naval Academy. Congratulations for making it this far, and thank you for serving our nation. With that being said, I would like to address the opposition's arguments in chronological order from how they were presented. The first argument that the opposition made was that the overarching institution is responsible, not the individual. And it is important to underscore this argument. The overarching institution is responsible and not the individuals that are involved. Now, the fundamental issue with this is that they are levying sole responsibility on the overarching institution as opposed to those individuals involved. Now, the University of Tampa agrees that it is to blame, the overarching institution, but aren't the individuals to blame as well? For instance, let's consider a situation with a doctor in a hospital. The hospital places certain guidelines, certain restrictions and regulations on doctors to ensure that they behave and practice medicine in a particular way. Now, the United Nations has done this, but when the doctor acts outside those circumscriptions, when he acts outside of those parameters, he personally is to blame. He was reckless and should be held accountable, just like these individuals who are acting recklessly without consideration for other human beings, and they ought to be held accountable. The opposition proceeded to argue that the intention was good. However, does good intention make sheer irresponsibility that killed thousands justifiable?
3 minutes.
The University of Tampa contends that this does not. They provided an anecdotal example of an admiral that made an improper course correction, and of course he is to blame because he was responsible for the ship's direction. But what if the ship's crew acted outside these parameters? Is the captain then the sole person to blame? Ladies and gentlemen, the answer is clear. Individuals ought to be held responsible, and the reasons for this is because we would be treating the dead like objects by not holding them accountable. We would simultaneously be increasing utility by setting a precedent. People will be more cautious, people will be more inclined to abide by these regulations that are set in place to protect individuals. And when you act outside of those limitations, when you operate outside of those parameters, you ought to be held accountable for the consequences that then ensue. Now, if we were to hold these individuals accountable, we would be promoting diligence and personal responsibility. And that, as Aristotle would argue, is ethical. The opposition, however, is not, with their argument, not holding these individuals responsible. We will see an inevitable decline in virtue. Virtue is not being exemplified. Nobody's being held accountable except for the overarching institution who already had regulations in place. So they're entirely missing the core issue of this question, and that is the core issue of this, of course, this question.
1 minute.
And that is that individuals are the ones who ought to be held to the highest standard, and they ought to operate within the confines of these regulations that institutions put in place. And when they do not act in that way, they should be held accountable. I'd like to yield the remainder of my time to my colleagues.
We would just like to further touch upon the possible concern raised by our opponents in that you could be disincentivizing people from engaging in humanitarian action. However, there is no reason to think that is unethical. In a sense that we would be promoting more safe regulations and more safe humanitarian aid in the similar example as of the doctor.
So a good analogy to make sure that, to kind of show that the individual is responsible. So let's say you invite a friend to come help you fix a door hinge.
I'm sorry, time is up.
Oh, okay. Well.
Judges, would you please score University of Tampa's commentary at the top right of your score sheet? Judges, are you ready to proceed? All right. U.S. Naval Academy, you will have 1 minute to confer, starting now.
We're good to go.
All right, ready to go. You will have 5 minutes for your response to the commentary, starting now.
The first thing that we want to really talk about is the main argument, the main philosophical argument that you guys talked about, and it was that you objected to the idea that the leadership is to be held accountable. You said that the main people that have to be held accountable are the individuals, and you really missed, I think, the biggest point of our argument. And I'm just going to clarify it. The authority figure acts as a barrier between the people on the outside and the people on the inside who might have actually done made whatever mistake is happening, whatever situation we're happening. The authority figure has within his responsibility to fire the people who made the mistake, or to punish them, or to change the inside of the system. However, the fact still remains that even though those people get fired or are not allowed to do, or the inside of the system is changed, the leadership is still held accountable by the outside community for his failure to ensure that everybody on the ground did exactly as he commanded. That's the argument that we're getting at. Yes, the individuals have to have a responsibility for it, but who is the outside community holding responsible? And that's the leadership. A good leader protects his individuals from outside scrutiny and then makes sure that on the inside he holds them to the highest possible ethical standards. And if he doesn't, it's him who it's his fault. So
You brought up the example of the doctor in the hospital, and you said the hospital has regulations put in place to make sure that their doctors and their staff are working in an appropriate manner. But you also implied that when the doctor messes up, it's purely his fault. But that's implying that when the hospital makes these regulations, they can just shake it off and be like, I made the regulation, people are going to do what they want, and they'll be the ones accountable for it. No, they have an ultimate responsibility to make sure that if I come up with this regulation, I need to make sure it's upheld with my staff in my hospital because I made it for a reason, and those probably are ethical reasons. So I need to make sure that these people uphold my standards if I set them. I don't just say, oh, if you mess up, it's on you. No, it's on me as well. I'm going to punish you because that's my ultimate job, but it's your responsibility. It's my responsibility to hold you accountable for what you did. Also, you said, you talked about how it would disincentivize people from having aid, and you said that was a good thing, but we're talking about it disincentivizing people who may not ultimately give Haiti cholera. It's going to disincentivize anyone from trying to go there, knowing that they could probably get fined or deterred from this.
Listen, it's not disincentivizing. It's not. You know what? It's increasing accountability, and that's what's the foremost importance here. Increasing accountability. On a ship, the CEO is responsible for, if the helmsman makes a left turn, right turn, that helmsman's not going to get fired. The CEO is getting fired on that ship. And that's the way the real world works. The CEO is responsible for the training of every man on the ship, that proper safety precautions are taken and proper measures are taken in all situations. This is not a measure to disincentivize people from joining the Navy or any military force or any business model, whatever. This is a model, this is a methodology to increasing people to be accountable for the rules and regulations that they set in place and the training that so that those rules and regulations, those standards are met. It's not a matter of disincentivizing.
Sorry, we're just going to help clarify what we said before. You talked about how, oh, the CO is held responsible. That's the commanding officer of a ship. That's who we said. You said he was an admiral, but we're talking about a captain. So I'm just clarifying what I'm talking about with you guys. But how a ship is driven is there's two people responsible for steering the ship and controlling the engine, and then there's someone responsible for commanding them, and then the CO is ultimately responsible for making sure they're doing their job. So he wasn't the one physically turning the wheel. He's the one responsible for training those people, making sure they're on the right track, and then upholding any standard he has for their training and implementation of what he's told them to do. So the fact that the ship crashed, it might have been the helmsman's fault for turning the wheel, the guy who turns the wheel, but ultimately he's responsible for making sure that guy knows what he's supposed to be doing with training and with regards to that particular instance. So what we're saying is he obviously wasn't the one who turned the wheel, but he's the one responsible and he's the one getting fired because he was responsible for them.
So if we look at it in the end, the public isn't going to come after the man who was on the helm or the man who was the man who was issuing the commands. The public comes after the commanding officer, but the commanding officer holds his people accountable.
And that's what good leadership is. Good leadership takes it personally when the people that they're leading, the Nepalese or whatever, doesn't do right. Good leadership takes it personally, and they do things that, to hold themselves accountable for their organization, as well as the people they're deploying out to these areas of the world to do good. So that way, the only thing that they do is good, and not the awful consequence of disease and death in whatever area of the world that they're trying to administer some sort of aid. There are rules and regulations that need to be adhered to, and it's the responsibility of the leadership to ensure that those rules and regulations are applied and the standards are met. Thank you.
Time is up. Judges, if you will please score the response to the commentary for the U.S. Naval Academy on the left side of your scoring sheet. Judges, are you ready to continue? All right. It is at this point that judges will have 10 minutes to ask questions of the U.S. Naval Academy. Each judge should have time for one question, and if needed, one short follow-up question. Judges may ask more than one questions if there is time at the end. At this time, judges will have 1 minute to confer before beginning to ask questions, starting now. All right, judges, you may now ask questions of the U.S. Naval Academy. The team may confer briefly before responding to the questions, but this is supposed to be a discussion. More than one team member may respond to any judge's questions. You will have 10 minutes, starting now.
So I think we all got the point very clearly that your perspective is that responsibility flows up the chain of command. That was very clear. However, I do want to point out that the United Nations is not a command climate. It's also not a business. And many of these enforcement mechanisms in terms of accountability don't exist in what is essentially a diplomatic body with very few enforcement mechanisms. So I want to hear you discuss some of the reasons why a country would volunteer forces. Again, this is not something that they're compelled to do. It's not something that they have no choice in. Why would a country want to volunteer for a humanitarian mission?
Ma'am, so I believe your question was two parts, and so the two parts being one, the non-organizational methodology of the UN and how it sends out deploys these people, and then secondly, the why would nations want to go out and participate in humanitarian aid, and so I'd like to answer the second question first, leading to the first question, because I think that's a good approach. The first question being, well, why would anybody want to go out and do good in the world? Why would anybody want to maybe not even go out and do good in the world? Why would anybody want to walk out of their house and, maybe not even give the guy on the street $1 who needs, or take the guy on the street out to lunch, or do something? Why would anybody want to leave their home and at a loss of time and do something on account of someone else or the good of someone else? It has to do with the people inherent desire to do good in the world, inherent desire to help out a fellow man. And that's where I think it comes from. And it leads people not only to help walk outside and walk out of their homes and do something good. It leads people to go around the world. If the Nepalese to leave Nepal and go all the way to Haiti to do something good, and that's the answering the. Why'd you go to Haiti? Oh, so why did I go to Haiti? That's what my teammates asking me. Why did I go to Haiti? Because I saw what I saw on TV. I saw human beings going through a difficult time. I saw men and women and children who needed help. I saw the lack of infrastructure and the disasters of a natural disaster. And that's what led me to go to Haiti, because I wanted to do, there was a desire in me, an inherent desire as a human being to go out and do something on behalf of my fellow human being. That's what leads people, in my mind, that's what led me, and that's what I feel like leads other people to go out and do these good things. Now, the second part of the question, or your first part, is the lack of organizational structure that the UN has. And I'd say that that's a problem all in itself. I mean, I have my own opinions of the UN, but that's not part of the question. The part of the question is why, I feel like the main part of the question is why is the UN operating and sending people out in the world under their title, under their name, the United Nations, forces from the United Nations, and deploying people out to do good in the world? Well, why are they doing that without the organizational accountability that's, it's so important whenever you send somebody to a foreign area of the world that they don't know anything about. Well, Haiti's it's a mountainous region. The infrastructure sucks, and it's hard to do anything good there. It's hard to do stuff. However, there are rules and regulations in place that the UN was ultimately responsible for, accounting for the people that they send out under their name, under their title, United Nations forces.
Well, and I'd also like to respond to your question by saying that the United Nations itself isn't a command structure, but I think if we looked at more of, you look at a specific program, a specific aid organization, and under that, I think that you would be able to create something that more closely resembles a command structure, and even if it doesn't, to at least say if you don't go and follow specific regulations, you can't go under our name. And I think that's what it basically comes down to. But there are problems with the United Nations itself that need to be fixed, and they're fairly fundamental. And so that's beyond the breadth of the question, too.
You're saying that the leaders are the ones who should ultimately be responsible. So I'd like to kind of take the question and flip it on its head. Should those who benefit from these peacekeeping and aid missions be responsible for any unintended consequences that befall the benefactors, the peacekeepers, or the bringers of aid? For example, the doctor who goes to Africa to help fight Ebola, who then contracts Ebola. Who's responsible for that?
Sir, so the difference between that and the cholera is, one, the Ebola, he went knowing the inherent risk. So it's the opposite. It's not bringing a disease to a country that's already struggling. It's not bringing something that was preventable. It's pretty clear that if you go to Haiti with a very unstable infrastructure with already poor sanitation compared to our standards, and know that this is a vulnerability of a disease like this breaking out, like cholera, you do have the duty to screen your people, make sure they're vaccinated, and make sure they're educated on the proper sanitary requirements and sanitary standards that will need to be upheld when they are in Haiti. There's a difference between knowing, I mean, every doctor has that risk every day, not necessarily Ebola, obviously, but there's been doctors who've been infected by their patients all the time, by needle sticks, by infections, and they ultimately know the benefit of what they're doing, and they think that outranks the inherent risk of catching a disease or getting poked by a needle or catching Ebola. And the difference is he chose to put himself at that risk. So he knew it was an inherent risk. So it's ultimately, I mean, I don't think it's anyone's fault. It just happened, and he accepted that when he went.
As to add in a little bit of an extension of what my colleague just stated, when I went to Haiti, there were numerous screening processes. There were the things to do that I had to do to ensure that I was medically qualified to go out and do something like this, so I wouldn't end up bringing a greater harm to this region of the world. And I adhered to those things. The difference between this doctor, I promise you that the medical community that he's a part of is struggling to figure out how this happened, and it's all over the news. How did this happen? Right? Is everyone at risk now? And that's the big question, because now all of a sudden there's a regulation, there's rules out there, but we just don't know it's more of the quandary of medicine, and that's tough to answer. It's a quandary of medicine. Thank you.
I'd like to, pardon me, I'd like to take this question back to its origin. Now, let me draw an analogy with you guys. Let's say an F-16 pilot goes to the wrong part of Afghanistan and drops a bomb. Does the air boss on the carrier gets blamed for his mistake, even though the AWACS clearly told him where to go to, but for whatever reason, the individual made a mistake in the cockpit and dropped the bomb in the wrong place? Now, if the air boss is going to get blamed for his mistake, does the captain of the aircraft carrier also get blamed in the same way you want to blame the UN? So follow-up to that question is this. The question simply asks, should they blame the peacekeepers? Now, again, on the line of individuals making mistakes, the Nepalese came, and presumably they were vetted by the UN before coming to Haiti. Individuals within the Nepalese contingency, they're the ones who defecated in the water. Now, the Asian people have a practice of bathing and drinking the river water. The Nepalese may not have known that. So do we then blame the Nepalese for not knowing the Asian custom, or do we still insist on blaming the UN because they were normally in charge of the Nepalese?
So in response to the F-16 thing, the F-16 pilot should absolutely be fired by the captain of the carrier, by the air boss. But at the same time, it's still a failure to train. It's still a failure to provide good direction on everybody above him in the chain of command, because that's how the chain of command works. Is that if someone down low does something good, the person up high also gets the praise for it. But it's the same way in reverse, because the chain of command is responsible for everything that everybody under them does. The second question is, are the Nepalese responsible? The Nepalese absolutely have a share of responsibility. They failed in their duty to first do no harm. They failed in that duty. However, the people who should blame the Nepalese and the disciplinary action, whatever action that should happen, needs to come from within the United Nations. But then outside pressure needs to look at the United Nations and how it failed to educate the Nepalese on why it's not okay to defecate into the water that the Haitian people bathe in, or the failure of the United Nations to ensure that all of the people that came from Nepal
Time is up. Judges, will you please score the question and answer session for the U.S. Naval Academy on the left side of your score sheet? At this time, yes. No, I'm sorry. All right, we are going to now move on to case 2. As a reminder, when one team is conferring, the other team and judges may make notes but may not discuss the case. After Professor Monroe distributes one copy of the case and the question of both teams, please leave them face down until instructed to turn them over. We are now going to be doing case number 3, Victim's Dilemma. The Norristown law has been repealed since this case was originally written. Did the town overreact? You may now turn your cases over, and you will have University of Tampa will have 2 minutes to confer for their case in chief, starting right now. Time is up for your conferral. You will have 10 minutes to present your case in chief. University of Tampa, are you ready? All right, you will have 10 minutes, starting now.
Thank you very much. The University of Tampa would like to first begin by reinstating the question, and that is, the Norristown law has been replaced since this case was originally written. Did the town overreact? The University of Tampa contends no, the town did not overreact because the law itself was morally impermissible. This is the inference that we will be drawing, and we will be approaching this question through the utilization of 3 of the most influential moral theories in ethical philosophy to date. The first of which we will be utilizing is Kantianism, which contends that morality is contingent upon respecting rational, autonomous human decision-making as well as not treating individuals like objects. Furthermore, we will be arguing from utilitarianism, which argues that morality is predicated upon maximizing utility in society while simultaneously decreasing suffering. We'll also be arguing Aristotelian virtue ethics, which contends that morality or the moral root is the one that exemplifies the most virtue and does not create vice. Now, the University of Tampa will proceed to apply these moral theories to the question to necessarily draw the conclusion that no, the town did not overreact because the law was morally impermissible. Now, what this law served to do is allow individuals to be treated as objects. We could see that since they were clearly disincentivized to call the police, this incentivize domestic abuse and domestic violence. The lady in question was treated like an object because this law put a barrier, a disincentive to calling for help, because she knew that the repercussions of her calling for help may just be a little worse than having to undergo another brutal beating from her abusive husband. This is what this law serves to do: to precipitate a climate that would allow for individuals to be treated like objects. Furthermore, we see a clear decrease in utility, a clear decrease in happiness for society. Because, again, individuals cannot call the police, especially if they're going through a particularly tempestuous time in their life, where they are subject to this sort of domestic abuse, or they feel that their life is threatened and they are paranoid. This disincentivizes them. This increases their suffering. In the circumstance in the case, clearly it increased their suffering. So the law is counterproductive. It does not serve to increase utility. It serves to decrease it. It does not serve to decrease suffering. It serves to increase it. Now, in terms of virtue ethics, we see clearly that this law does not exemplify virtue. What this law is doing is decreasing the virtues of personal responsibility, the virtues of duties that these police officers have to respond to cases that could potentially be life-threatening. So when we take these into consideration, these three influential moral theories that arrive at an identical conclusion, we could see very apparently that the town did not overreact by repealing the law, because it treated individuals like objects or precipitated a climate that would allow for such behavior to occur. It decreased utility by disincentivizing calling the police, by placing barriers on that, barriers to calling for help. It decreased the virtues of personal responsibility and duty that these police officers have to the community. With that, I would like to yield the remainder of my time to my colleagues to address possible concerns.
So the argument for the law in the case is that it could encourage people to solve domestic disputes among themselves as opposed to referring to the police. Now, this isn't exactly clear because the case in the law did not account for other people calling the police on behalf of the individuals. It is very easy to see a circumstance where somebody who did not like their neighbor or maybe didn't politically, religiously, morally agree with their neighbor to call the police for very minor circumstances. And this would in turn get the individual evicted. And this is why the law is morally impermissible. Now, another possible concern is that allowing this sort of law would free up the police force, in that they wouldn't need to deal with minor disputes and they could attend to the more pressing issues. However, it's the duty of the police to inquire into situations that people feel are threatening to them, whether this is a first, second, third, or 15th offense. It is the police's duty, and then it is the duty of the court to step in such circumstances where a nuisance is occurring. And I'd like to yield to Connor.
As Nicole pointed out, going and applying what she just said to virtue theory, it's clear that one contention would be that that allowing for the law would promote self-responsibility, but it doesn't, as she's pointed out. And I have nothing else to add. You covered everything.
Another point is that if the police are allowed to this law could allow 1 in 3 women are already victims of domestic abuse, and this law kind of it allows them to overlook domestic abuse, so it has the chance to increase exponentially.
Now, taking these concerns into consideration, we feel, as the University of Tampa, that this does not serve to deconstruct our argument in a way as to make it invalid. We believe that addressing these concerns only serve to
3 minutes.
consolidate the inference that we have drawn, and that inference being that no, the town did not overreact because the law was clearly morally impermissible. And I state again, it precipitates a climate that would allow for an increase in domestic abuse and allow an increase in individuals being treated like objects, and that is morally impermissible. It would create disincentives to calling the police, and even if it's on the landlord himself, again, the landlord might react if he was a rational agent economically. He would increase prices to try and discriminate against people of lower incomes who tend to face these sorts of conditions in the household. So it would only serve to cause disutility and increase suffering. And again, virtues are not being exemplified. And in conclusion, the town did not overreact by repealing the case because the law itself was morally impermissible. The University of Tampa would like to yield the remainder of their time.
Okay. Judges, please score the University of Tampa in the top right of your score sheet. Judges, are you ready? All right, U.S. Naval Academy. You will have 1 minute to confer for your response, starting now. All right, your time is up. You will have 5 minutes for your response. U.S. Naval Academy, are you ready?
Yes, sir, we are.
All right,
we
you
are
have
ready.
5 minutes, starting now.
You know, you guys presented a pretty good argument, but we'd like to not only look at your argument and agree with it, but we'd like to expound upon it and advance it on some really critical points. And to answer the question first, yeah, did the town overreact? Well, no, because at this point in time, my colleague's going to point out a very specific point, is that the town, after they repealed the act, they went and replaced it with another ordinance that did the same thing. So maybe, you know, and that's actually in one of the articles attached to the case. So we'd like to look at this case in our framework of looking at the intent, the action, and the result in order to form a more holistic approach to the ethics and all the ethics involved in the case. Looking at the intent, let's look at the law first and the intent of the law, which my colleague is going to do at the far end of the table.
The intent of the law, the original law, was not to do the things that have the unfortunate consequences that happened. The way the city implemented the law and the way the police force unfortunately portrayed the rules that they were telling them, because the law specifically states that the 3 strikes that were proverbially going to be used against the people were only in situations where would not count where arrest was instated. The woman, however, was struck in the second time that the cops were called on her case. She was struck in the head with a brick, and because of a result of this, the man was arrested and the man was sent to jail. Therefore, when the officer told her, "Ma'am, the next time that this happens to you, you will be evicted," he was completely wrong in that statement because an arrest had happened. This second strike, where it's just a public disturbance, was wrong. And the fact that after that, after the law was wrong, the city continued to try and evict her even after they didn't admit they were wrong. So the law was intended to be correct.
Then sort of in response, just in a first off manner to your argument is that the city sort of acted in some sort of moral way by getting rid of this law. And you sort of portray them as a moral actor that's advancing Kantian utilitarian and Aristotelian ethics. And you make that sound like a really good thing. But if you read the articles carefully that are attached to the case, you'll find something really interesting, that the city axed the law because of a bunch of political pressure that was going against it, and then 2 weeks later created another law that was exactly the same, except for the fact that instead of the cops evicting the tenant, the cops made the landlord evict the tenant. So really, the city didn't overreact to anything because the city didn't end up doing anything different. There's no ethical action because the city ended up starting to finishing with a 2-week gap of doing nothing because of political pressure with the exact same status quo.
The law itself didn't encourage domestic violence. The wrong implementation by the cops and the wrong interpretation by the cops is doing what you're saying the law did.
So we have to really ask ourselves in the examination of this case, what is the aim of the city? When you look at the case and you look at the articles attached, they ignored the court hearing that said that this woman, Mrs. Briggs, should not have been evicted from her home. They ignored the First Amendment right for everyone to petition your government. In the form of petitioning your government, that means calling the police, calling law enforcement to your aid. And the whole point of law enforcement is to serve and protect. And in this case, you're right. You know what? It's not only a utility matter, but they're disincentivizing calling the police and petitioning your government. They're disincentivizing it irreversing Maslow's hierarchy of needs, first to shelter and then to health and safety. They're turning this woman's ethical need, the natural need of a human being to have shelter and be safe. And the results of all of these things is 20% of the homeless people in this town are from domestic violence cases. This is absurd. I mean, and then the lasting effects of gender discrimination against mainly women who are the resulting or hurting the most from these laws. And look, there's a public goods appropriation problem here. There's a public goods appropriation problem. The public good being law enforcement. The town obviously needs to do more to say that the public good can be proportionally distributed to all of the town in an equal way, so that everyone can just equally receive the good thing that's law enforcement. I'm from a domestic violence household. If law enforcement didn't come to my house and do what they needed to do, I probably wouldn't be here today. And I'm a result of good laws in a good state of New Jersey. And I'd like to pass it on if my colleagues want to add anything else. No? Well, we've answered your question. We've advanced upon your arguments, and I hope that you can answer some of these very strong points that we saw in your argument as flaws. And it'd be really great to add to the conversation. Thank you.
Okay. University of, I'm sorry. Judges, will you please score the U.S. Naval Academy's response? This will be on the left side of your score sheet. Judges, are you ready? All right. University of Tampa, you will have 1 minute to confer for your response to the commentary, starting now.
Thank you, Naval Academy.
This is for a conferral.
Sorry. The University of Tampa is prepared.
Excellent. University of Tampa, you will have 5 minutes for your response to the commentary, starting now.
We would first like to begin by thanking the Naval Academy for their thoughtful consideration of our arguments and agreeing with us. It definitely made our task less strenuous. However, the University of Tampa would like to note that our three primary moral arguments to draw these inferences were untouched entirely throughout the opposition's commentary. And we believe that since they neglected to attack the pillars of our argument, our inference stands, and that our arguments were solid in that respect. But they did address some notable concerns and very relevant concerns, and I would like to respond to those. My colleague on the opposition table suggested that the intent of the law did not necessarily create the repercussions that, of course, it intended to do. And we agree, even though intention, we believe, is wholly irrelevant. Clearly, we could see why, because the repercussions do not coincide with the intent, which is why it was not an overreaction. It was not an overreaction for the town to repeal this law. And furthermore, I believe there was a misunderstanding. We did not suggest that the city was the moral actor propounding these Kantian, utilitarian, and virtue ethics. What we suggested was that the nullification of this law, this unjust and inherently immoral law, coincides with the arguments that we have presented for Kantianism, for utilitarianism, as well as for virtue theory.
3 minutes.
With that, I'd like to yield the remainder of my time to my colleague.
I would like to touch upon the contention regarding the political motives behind repealing this law, which sort of adds to what Ulysses was mentioning with the city not being a moral agent, or we're not contending that the city is the moral agent. We are essentially positing that regardless of whether political pressure, regardless of whether political pressure was the incentive for having this law repealed, the law itself was immoral. And as such, it was a moral good to have it repealed. And I'd like to yield to Connor.
Just to go off of what Nicole is saying, I mean, the intent of the law doesn't really matter. It's the enactment of the law. So, and we have to figure out what theory of law that we adopt. So do we adopt legal realism? Do we adopt legal positivism, interpretivism? If we adopt legal realism, then the law is whatever is enacted, whatever is done. So if regardless of what the police did, that is in essence what the law is. And continuing on, you go into legal interpretivism and you use moral theories to kind of go through that. But another question is that do we accept the offense principle, which is kind of the underlying foundation of this whole argument? Is it okay to call the police if somebody's being too loud next door? That somehow that you have a positive right to not have to hear noise? I mean, do you have that right? So I just want to raise that question, and I yield to Sarah or Nicole.
I'd like to just again reiterate a point made by Ulysses in regards to the argument put forth by our colleagues across the table that it was not the law that it was not the law that promoted domestic abuse and domestic violence, and that is true. It was not the intent of the law, but the enactment of the law did, and because of the underlying immoral reasons we have already suggested.
The University of Tampa would like to yield the remainder of their time.
All right. Judges, will you please score the University of Tampa on the right side of your score sheet? Judges, are you ready? All right, at this time you will be communicating with each other about questions that you would like to ask going forward. You will have 1 minute to do so, starting now. You guys ready? All right, let's do it. You will have 10 minutes to ask questions for the University of Tampa. Remember that each judge should have time for one question, and if needed, a short follow-up question. And we can ask more questions if there is more time towards the end. We will go until time is up, or you guys are fresh out of good ideas. All right. All right. Okay. Are you guys ready?
Yes.
All right, here we go. 10 minutes, starting now.
I'd like to hear more about how you feel the town could have better crafted this law to address the issue of overburdened police response without violating any of the principles that you outlined at the beginning of your case.
Thank you. That is an excellent question. And the University of Tampa believes that there should not be a law in place that disincentivizes calling police in any capacity. And that's because what happens is unintended consequences. We've explored that previously, and we've reached the inference that clearly it leads to ethically impermissible outcomes. However, there are systems in place with law enforcement that if you call on numerous occasions, and of course the circumstances of why you are calling are irrelevant, or they don't really need a law enforcement to be there to mediate the dispute, law enforcement officials in that particular municipality will take note of that. They will know that this individual calls multiple times for irrelevant things, and if something else comes up, if someone who really needs the police is calling, of course they're going to send the majority of their troopers over to that event or wherever that event is occurring and defer response to the individual who calls continuously for wholly irrelevant events that are occurring. So we don't believe that there ought to be a law put in place because of the slippery slope that it is. However, we believe that law enforcement officials are already taking action, and that we believe would be enough to deter that sort of irrelevant calling.
Just to follow up on my colleague's question, in your preparation for this case, did you come across any, in your researching, any other towns or cities with similar laws enacted?
Thank you, sir. Very thoughtful question. in places like Anna Maria, where my colleague is from, and in places like Los Angeles, where I'm from, there are nuisance laws in place that act to try to prohibit or at least circumscribe the extent to which this sort of behavior occurs, where someone is bothered by noise or something to that capacity. However, we did not come across another city that has enacted ordinances that would place, for instance, or would disincentivize police coming and doing their duty and upholding their personal responsibility to the individuals in that particular municipality. And we believe that this case was definitely a trial. They saw that it was wrong. So clearly, I personally believe that other cities would not follow suit, showing that it only served to bring about immoral implications.
I would just like to add that even if there were such municipalities or such areas and cities where these sorts of laws were actively in place, that doesn't necessitate that they are morally permissible. And the University of Tampa is under the impression that even if every county in the nation had such laws, it would still be predicated on immoral grounds.
You've characterized domestic violence as occurring primarily in lower socioeconomic areas. You even went so far as to suggest that landlords have an economic incentive to remove those tenants and replace them with a higher class of tenants by raising their rent. But you also stated that 1 in 3 women are victims of domestic abuse. How do you rectify those numbers?
The University of Tampa believes that these two statistics or these numbers that you have brought up do actually coincide with one another. We are under the impression that this law is immoral as stands, and it is immoral for the very reason that it could provide it could provide an incentive for kicking people out of your building and replacing them with a higher class of individuals. And this is why it's wrong. And simultaneously paired with the fact that it would disincentivize the 1 in 3 women from calling the police, we can see that these two issues do coincide and, in fact, do support our conclusion that the law is immoral.
I'm sorry, perhaps you've misunderstood my question. You've stated that 1 in 3 women are victims of domestic abuse. Are you going so far as to say that all of those women come from low socioeconomic status?
Well, that is a good question. Our response to that would be that domestic violence is prevalent. It is even more so prevalent in lower income households and in impoverished socioeconomic communities. It is even more prevalent in impoverished socioeconomic communities that have these sort of unjust laws that would create atmospheres that would then allow for individuals to be treated like objects in relation to domestic violence. So your question is a good one. However, it serves only to get worse as we go down the socioeconomic chain. Of course, domestic violence occurs in the middle class, it occurs in the upper class. However, landlords would be more inclined, because the statistics clearly show, to have people from upper income households by raising their prices, because domestic violence obviously would be less prevalent, as the statistics show, than of course at the lower end where these laws are in place and where the socioeconomic status is poor.
You speak of incentivizing. Let's go back and put you in the devil's shoe right here. What was the aim, or what could be the aim of a city in enacting the law that this town enacted in the first place? What was its purpose?
The intention behind this law is two things primarily. First of which is to free up the police force so they could tend to more calling tasks, which of course would still most likely be the case if the law were not in place, as I've discussed earlier. And the second primary endeavor of this law would to have people settle disputes diplomatically and by themselves, as opposed to always having to resort to call the police. Now, I believe I've answered your question, unless you have a follow-up that you're waiting to pounce on me.
There probably won't be time for follow-up as there's 6 seconds remaining.
Well, now there won't be.
Indeed. All right, so time is up. Judges, please score the question and response round for University of Tampa. University of Tampa, U.S. Naval Academy, you both did an excellent job. Congratulations getting this far. Now take a deep breath while we tabulate the scores together. Judges, are you ready to go? Now it's time for my grand game show moment. This will be Judge 1, this will be Judge 2, and this will be Judge 3. Apparently, we're also playing Duck, Duck, Goose. Okay. So, Judge 1, what is your score for the U.S. Naval Academy? 47. Judge 2, what is your score? 42. And Judge 3, what is your score? 47. All right. For Team 2, oh, thank you, you're good at that. I didn't even need anything. Human calculator over here, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. Judge 1, for the University of Tampa, what is your score? 42. Judge 2, what is your score? 56. And Judge 3, 51. Congratulations, University of Tampa. You are the champions. 149. Awesome.
Okay, we'd like to present the trophies right now. Let's start with the third place trophy, which is the University of Alabama, Birmingham. Please come up. Okay, do you guys have somebody with a camera to take a picture of you?